Lord, the light of your love is shining in the midst of the darkness shining. Jesus, light of the world, shine upon us. Set us free by the truth you now bring us. Shine on me. Shine on me. Shine, Jesus, shine. Fill this land with the Father's glory. Blaze, Spirit, blaze. Set our hearts on fire. Flow, river, flow. Flood the nations with grace and mercy. Send forth your word, Lord, and let there be light.
Good morning and welcome to Let the Bible Speak. My name is Alex Meredith. I'm here today with Robert Curry. Very glad to have you on. Welcome to the program, everybody. I'm glad you're here. And we have a really fascinating topic that we're going to be covering both this week and next week as well. We're going to be talking about biblical archaeology, and Robert Curry is here with me from the Lapeer congregation to help us talk about that. So what I want to do is, Robert, if you could tell us a little bit about who you are, your background with archaeology, specifically biblical archaeology, and really why you think that biblical archaeology is an important topic in the first place to cover.
Okay, well, I am Robert Curry. I'm preaching for the Lapeer Church of Christ. I am have been given the opportunity to talk about a very fascinating topic in regard to Bible archaeology. My experience in Bible archaeology is a dig season in 2000 at Tel Beit-shemesh, which is just 15 miles west and a little bit south of the city of Jerusalem in Israel. I did the entire season, and then also my academic training has been several hours of Bible archaeology and archaeology in general when I was in grad school, when I was in my doctoral programs. And out of that, I have been able to write some things. I have been able to do broadcasts such as this. But primarily, I am interested in exploring how the Bible is understood based upon archaeological evidence, archaeological topics, and archaeological techniques. By doing so, we learn an awful lot about what the Bible says, its backgrounds, as well as the ongoing issues that might emerge within an account, a story, or some psalm, or anything else that might arise as we study the Word of God.
So the way that we're going to go about this today and the way that we're going to conduct this discussion is over the next 2 weeks, we are going to cover 4 separate cases, if you will. 4 separate either historical events or specific archaeological discoveries, and all of these events and or discoveries have to do directly with Scripture. And so we're gonna point that out as we go along and discuss some of that. So the very first case that we're actually going to talk about is Sennacherib, King Sennacherib of Assyria. We're going to talk about his invasion of not just Israel, the Israelite people, but actually of Judah. And this is something that's happening around 701 BC, so this is very late in the 8th century BC. So you think about where we are today, that's almost 3,000 years ago. But it turns out we actually know a lot about this between the biblical account and biblical archaeology that's been conducted on the topic. So let's talk a little about this event itself. King Sennacherib of Assyria, he had destroyed Samaria, which was the capital of the northern kingdom, Ephraim. He had destroyed Samaria about 10 years before. And we actually know this as well from the biblical account. All of Israel was destroyed by the Assyrians, just massacred, really. And the Assyrians were notorious for their war capability. They were a brutal people. And so obviously after they had conquered that northern area, the fear was, well, now they're going to come farther south into the region of Judah. And they did. And after defeating Samaria, Sennacherib launched this very successful campaign against Judah and against all these fortified cities. I think we were talking about it, and you said about 46 cities had been eventually just decimated and taken over by them. And so Jerusalem marked the final part of that conquest, right? That was the final piece of the puzzle for Sennacherib to say, all right, now I've really conquered Judah. And King Hezekiah, meanwhile, was in the city of Jerusalem. And King Hezekiah, the king of Judah at the time, he really had a choice to make. And Isaiah chronicles this. The book of Kings chronicles this. The book of Chronicles chronicles this. And we know how this plays out. We know that King Hezekiah, at the point when Sennacherib comes and he begins laying siege to the city, so his army is starting to surround it. They're trying to cut off food supply. They're trying to cut off water supply. They're trying to wait out the Judah army. And the goal was you weaken them to a point where either they surrender or they're so weak that now they can invade the city and the military forces won't be able to do anything about it, right? So that's what Sennacherib was trying to do. And Hezekiah essentially had a choice at this point. One option was he could just submit to Sennacherib and he could say, all right, game's over, you win. Another option that he had is he could have gone and tried to go to his, I say allies loosely, he could have tried to go to Egypt and ask for help, which really would have set him up as a proxy and almost a slave of sorts now to the Egyptian regime. So he could have done that, or, and this is what Isaiah poses to Hezekiah. Isaiah says, or you can put your trust in God. You can put your trust in God who's done all this and brought Israel to where it is now, and you can put your trust in him and he will deliver you, right?
That's right.
So what we're going to do is we're going to read some of the biblical account of this, because I really want you to see, before we start talking about the archaeological side of things, let's read some of this and see, yeah, this is actually here. This is real life stuff. So we're going to start out in 2 Kings 18. And Robert, if you could start us out by reading verses 13 through 17.
In the 14th year of King Hezekiah, Sennacherib, king of Assyria, came up against all the fortified cities of Judah and took them. And Hezekiah, king of Judah, sent to the king of Assyria at Lachish, saying, I have done wrong. Withdraw from me. Whatever you impose on me, I will bear. And the king of Assyria required of Hezekiah, king of Judah, 300 talents of silver and 30 talents of gold. And Hezekiah gave him all the silver that was found in the house of the Lord and in the treasures of the king's house. At that time, Hezekiah stripped the gold from the doors of the temple of the Lord and from the doorposts that Hezekiah, king of Judah, had overlaid, and gave it to the king of Assyria. And the king of Assyria sent to Tartan the Rabsaris and the Rabeshah with a great army from Lachish to King Hezekiah at Jerusalem. And they went up and came to Jerusalem. When they arrived, they came and stood by the conduit of the upper pool, which is on the highway to the washer's field.
And then if we pick up in verses 28 and 29 of that same chapter, then the Rabshakeh, so this is a messenger on behalf of the king of Assyria, right?
Yes.
The Rabshakeh, he stood out and called out in a loud voice in the language of Judah, hear the word of the great king, the king of Assyria. Thus says the king, do not let Hezekiah deceive you, for he will not be able to deliver you out of my hand. So these are threats, right? The king of Assyria is trying to make threats against the people of Judah to just make them scared enough to surrender. But then we see what happens. So if you could pick up in chapter 19, 15 through 19. Let's see how that goes.
And Hezekiah prayed before the Lord and said, O Lord, the God of Israel, enthroned above the cherubim, you are the God, you alone, and all of the kingdoms of the earth, you have made heaven and earth. Incline your ear, O Lord, and hear. Upon your eyes, O Lord, and see, and hear the words of Sennacherib, which he has sent to mock the living God. Truly, O Lord, the kings of Assyria have laid waste the nations of their lands, and have cast their gods into the fire. For they are not gods, but the work of men's hands, wood and stone. Therefore they were destroyed. So now, O Lord our God, save us, please, from his hand, that all the kingdoms of the earth may know that you, O Lord, are God alone.
And you can really see here, by the way, that in the ancient world, when kings went to war with each other, they very much saw this as a divine undertaking, right?
Yes.
When Assyria goes into Judah, this is the Assyrian gods against the God of Israel.
That's right.
Right?
That's right.
And that's actually depicted in some of the things we're going to look at here.
Yes.
So to just finish this out, we see how all of this ends. In 2 Kings chapter 19, verse 35, and that night the angel of the Lord went out and struck down 185,000 in the camp of the Assyrians. And when people arose early in the morning, behold, these were all dead bodies. And then Sennacherib, king of Assyria, departed and went home and lived in Nineveh, where, by the way, soon after, I believe one of his sons assassinated him took over. And so you see the kind of kingdom that is, right?
That's right, exactly.
So, and attached to this, one other thing that I'll mention in the text that we see in 2 Kings chapter 20, verse 20, it says, the rest of the deeds of Hezekiah and all his might, and how he made the pool and the conduit and brought water into the city, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Judah? Right. It mentions almost in passing these water conduits that flow into Jerusalem, and that's something that may be relevant here in a minute. So,
exactly.
So Robert, if you could share with us some of the findings archaeologically that are relevant to this event, to Sennacherib's invasion of Judah, enlighten us.
Okay. One of the things that we know for sure is the fact that Sennacherib came upon the heels of some very powerful men. His grandfather, a man by the name of Shalmaneser III, was one of the greater rulers of Assyria and had imposed upon the people that he had conquered time and time again the imposition of taxes, the taking of wealth, and so forth. So when Sennacherib shows up, we know for a fact that he had an incredible reputation that was preceding him. That is why we see in the text how King Hezekiah began to resort to trying to pay tribute to Sennacherib so that he would go away, that he would not attack the city. But of course that did not work. That was not what God would want of him to do. Things began to change. And one of the things that we noticed here in 2 Kings chapter 20 is the word about how he had made the pool and the conduit and brought water into the city, and are they not all written in the book of the Chronicles of the King of Judah? If you were to travel to Jerusalem, you could actually walk through those tunnels, that conduit, because Hezekiah took the opportunity to dig a tunnel almost a half-mile long underneath the ground that came out of the pool of Bethsaida and then ended up at the pool of Siloam, bringing water into the city in a place where Hezekiah could not come and poison the water. Once you poison the water, you therefore have conquered the city, because obviously they have to have water. But Hezekiah, thinking ahead, therefore allowed the people to survive because the water could not be touched. You can do that. You can go there and take a look at all of that, because it is something that was excavated some time ago. At first they didn't know what it was. But then as they began to dig it out and begin to notice what it was doing, the direction it was taking, all of a sudden this information regarding Hezekiah digging the tunnel, still called to this day Hezekiah's tunnel, that became very pertinent, because now we have physical evidence archaeologically of something the Bible therefore reveals. It is an incredible opportunity to be able to see something firsthand that we find here within the biblical text. Sennacherib also, in regard to what Alex had said a moment ago, this was not a very popular thing that Sennacherib had attempted to do. He should have been able to take the city without really firing a shot, because they were so frightened and they thought that they had the upper hand, but that was not the case. And that is why we therefore know that from archaeology we see the evidence of Sennacherib's downfall within his own country, how he was deposed, and then someone else took his place and therefore tried to do what Sennacherib could not do, which of course we know archaeologically was not able to happen.
Yeah, and we know also connected with that, we know that these other cities did get decimated by the Assyrians.
Yes.
There's certainly evidence of that, and the fact that there's evidence of the destruction of those other cities, but then no evidence of Assyrian settlement in the land after that, that's...
Yeah.
It seems like something scared them away.
Absolutely.
Right?
And one of the things that we see here is that archaeologically there are what was referred to as objects of pottery that would be used for writing. The Syrian captain of the army of Israel was stationed at the city of Lachish. You remember we were reading about Lachish a moment ago. He noticed from the parapets of that particular place, looking out over the valley, that you could see for miles. It's flat, and you could see for miles, especially from his vantage point. He wrote back on these what's called iskari. He wrote back the account of what he saw and sent those ostraca back to Hezekiah to let him know what was going on. If you go to the British Museum, you can see 39 of those ostraca as they have been put away, cleaned, and then brought out again and put on display. I have been fortunate to see them with my own eyes and actually was able to touch one of them, and by doing so got a little bit of a connection regarding this biblical event.
Yeah, and it's not just Judah that's writing about this. One thing to think about in connection with these archaeological events is motive, right? We think about, all right, well, what motive would this commander in Lachish have for making up something about, the Assyrian army doing this or that? He wouldn't want to talk about the military conquest of the enemy. That doesn't really make sense unless it's true and verifiable, right? Connected with that, the commander at Lachish is not the only one who writes about this,
That's right.
is it?
Exactly.
So we actually know from the Assyrians, particularly under Sennacherib, kept tremendous records. Sennacherib, maybe a bit of an egomaniac, really liked to talk about himself.
Yeah.
We've actually got a few pictures, if we can pull maybe a couple of those up. Yeah, so Robert, tell us about this. Where is this found and where is it now?
This is what is called a bas relief. A bas relief is where a flat bit of stone was therefore carved, and everything that they wanted to depict was therefore brought out in relief from the surface. And you see the picture there of Sennacherib there in the center, and the armies that is with him, and he is depicting how strong he was within battle. He has, you see the arrows, you see the swords, you see the people with him, and it was a demonstration of his incredible power. This stood within on the walls of his palace. It now resides, unless it has been moved, it now resides within the British Museum, within the Mesopotamian section. And it depicts the Sennacherib in a way that would show him as a mighty warrior and leader.
So related to this, we also have the next picture here is called the Annals of Sennacherib, or the Sennacherib cylinder. And this is something that Sennacherib himself and his officials, he had written. And this is not just generally about some of the vague military campaigns. This goes into tremendous detail about Hezekiah specifically, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. He actually mentions Hezekiah by name, referring to him as the king of the Judites. And he talked about how he had gone into the land and he had taken all of these various cities, that he had therefore threatened the people. The people were afraid. And then finally he said that he kept Hezekiah within his own walls. In other words, not able to come out to me. What he was actually doing was trying to cover his own bases, because he was not able to take the city, breach the walls of Jerusalem. And so in writing in these annals, he makes it look like he is winning the day, and that Hezekiah therefore hid behind his own walls instead of coming out and taking me on, me, the mighty warrior of the Assyrians, the king of Assyria.
Yeah, a little bit of a propaganda machine.
Yes,
right?
exactly.
It made it look like he just got bored and went back on his own volition.
Exactly.
And then I think we've got one more here, which is the seal of Hezekiah. Yeah, we'll get it here in a minute.
Yeah.
There we go. So yeah, this is, how did these come about, Robert?
But what that is a piece of clay, just simply a blob of clay, and then or wax. It depended upon this. In this particular case, it's clay. And then all the kings, just like we know about, like in medieval Europe and so forth, they had signet rings. Or a signet stamp. It could be on a ring, or it could be like a stamp, like the old-fashioned children's stamps where you stamped different colors on the sheet of paper. And it had his inscription, and only he, Hezekiah, could use that particular signet. And you'll notice there the lettering and so forth, which is in Hebrew, and it describes that this is the signet of Hezekiah, king of Judah. And then you have the depiction of the eagle, which was an ancient symbol of power because of its ability to fly, to soar over the heavens, to pass over everybody, and then attack whenever it wanted to be attacked. And so this is now, again, resides within the British Museum in London, England, and has been there for quite some time, and was actually discovered when archaeologists were looking for something else, and then all of a sudden it popped out of the ground. It's only about the size of a quarter. Sometimes they're as large as a silver dollar, but usually the size of a quarter, and they would have been used to identify Hezekiah as the king because only he could use that symbol.
So we had, we've got all this evidence that backs up the biblical account, right? Mm-hmm. I know we were discussing this earlier, and one of the things that you mentioned is, does this prove absolutely that this exact thing and that the entire biblical account, does it prove it? Well, no, but it's really, really good evidence for it,
yes, that's right. Exactly. Yeah.
And that happens all throughout Scripture, right?
Absolutely.
So I find it just remarkable how much we find it continues to correlate with the biblical account.
That's right.
So with that said, let's move on to our next case. We'll talk a little bit about this place called Tel Beit-shemesh. When we talk about a tell, and there are lots of places that are called a tell and then some name, right? A tell, well, what is that in layman's terms?
Basically a hill.
Yeah.
And the city sits on a hill.
Yeah, so a tell, it's archaeological evidence. It's basically built up over time, and now you could be looking at an ancient city and not even know it, but it's this big grassy lump in the middle of the desert, right? And unless you dig into it, you don't really know what it is.
Actually, when you travel through Israel, it's very common, especially in the south, what they would call the Negev. It's very common to be traveling through those regions and see several of these mounds. And they're unexcavated. They don't have the time, don't have the money or opportunity or whatever, but they are unexcavated cities or villages or towns of some kind. And so all of these tells are visible everywhere. And you find that not just simply in Israel, but you find it all throughout the Middle East and into ancient Mesopotamia. And they are evidence of ancient civilizations.
So you think about how much there is yet to be discovered.
Absolutely,
right?
Absolutely.
So Beit-shemesh itself, to my understanding, this is relatively small. But there's a lot of biblical activity here. We know in Joshua chapter 15, verse 10, just almost a passing remark. We know this is part of the northern border of Judah. It says, in the boundary circles west of Baalah to Mount Seir, passes along the northern shoulder to Mount Jearim, that is Sheshalon, and goes down to Beit-shemesh and passes along by Timnah. That's not the first mention of it, but we know that this is, it lies in the region that was allotted to Judah. We find in other books, actually later on in Joshua, this is a Levitical city. Each one of the tribes had certain cities that the Levites were given a special allotment of, and we see that it's appointed for that. The most interesting activity really that happens is in 1 Samuel chapter 6, verses 11 through 15. So let's read that real quick. I know we're a little short on time here, but let's go to 1 Samuel 6. Let's start in verse 11. Here we go. And this is after the Philistines had taken the Ark of the Covenant. They had stolen it. So in verse 11, they put the Ark of the Lord, this is the Philistines, they put it on a cart And the box with the golden mice and images of their tumors, they were trying to please the God of Israel in the way that they knew how. And the cows went straight in the direction of Beit-shemesh along one highway, lowing as they went. They turned neither to the right nor to the left, and the lords of the Philistines went after them as far as the border of Beit-shemesh. Now the people of Beit-shemesh were reaping their wheat harvest in the valley, and when they lifted up their eyes and saw the ark, they rejoiced to see it. The cart came into the field of Joshua of Beit-shemesh and stopped there. A great stone was there, and they split up the wood of the cart, and offered the cows as a burnt offering to the Lord. And the Levites took down the ark of the Lord and the box that was beside it, in which were the golden figures, and set them upon the great stone. So we see that after the Philistines had taken the ark, God scares them to death by they had placed the Ark of the Covenant in their own temple, and the temple basically comes crumbling down, and Dagon bowing down. And it's quite a amusing story, actually. And so they, out of fear, return the ark, and it comes to Beit-shemesh. And this really critical piece of history there. So I know we're really short here, but what are some of the things that have been discovered there?
Beit-shemesh is one of the lesser significant in regard to like Jerusalem and Bethel, Shiloh, and so forth, but it's extremely significant for the expansion of Judah throughout that particular region. Not only was it mentioned in regard to the Ark of the Covenant, but it was also one of the cities that was eventually taken by Sennacherib, and those that disbelieve the Bible consider it to be nothing more than just simply a legend or a good story, but it really doesn't tell the truth. I stood and watched and witnessed and also helped to excavate incredible evidence of their preparations for attack, in other words, Sennacherib. And in the period of time, 701 BC, we can date those objects that we find, like for instance, a sword blade that I found myself, partial sword blade, and also the incredible evidence of fallen stones that were burned in heat so much that they were burned to the core. They are dark all the way to the core. And the idea is that Sennacherib destroyed the city, or at least decimated the city, and we have archaeological evidence to establish that very thing. And by doing so, we understand the truth then of this account.
And we know that after that event, and after that event of attack, it doesn't appear that there was any attempt after that to really settle it.
Exactly.
You found human remains there, but as far as you all can tell, there's no evidence to seriously resettle the area.
Right.
And that totally backs up the account of how we know things happen in Scripture.
Exactly right.
So here's what we're going to do here. We are going to continue this discussion into next week. Next week, we're going to be talking about a place known as the Praetorium, which is related heavily to some of the history of Jesus himself and Pilate. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk some about the Dead Sea Scrolls. But that's all going to be next week, and we hope that you get the opportunity to join us for that. Again, it'll be next week at 10 o'clock in the morning on Sunday morning. So if you get the opportunity to join us for that, we're going to continue this conversation and talk about those two other cases. I really want to thank you for giving us the opportunity to share some of this with you today. Thank you, Robert, for joining us on the program.
My pleasure.
May God bless you, and I hope you have a wonderful week.
Glory blaze, Spirit blaze, set our hearts on fire. Flow, river, flow, flood the nations with grace and mercy. Send